last week we talked a little bit about what we think might happen at the top end of the draft, and we also talked about some of the late risers, guys who are moving up the draft charts. This time around, we're only about 5-6 days prior to the draft now, and I want to talk about a few kids who may actually be sliding down the draft charts a little bit, as well as a few surprise picks who might slip into the first round that people may not be familiar with or aren't really thinking of as potential first round draft picks. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about Peter Holland. Peter is a guy who, he's very good at both ends of the ice. He does everything fairly well, but there's not a lot of pop or flash to his game, and there's not any one particular area or facet of the game that he excels at so much that he's really gaining notoriety. I don't think he's going to drop dramatically on draft day, but for most of the season, people have been, considering him around the 20th overall pick, somewhere in that, 19 to 24, 25 range, and it was kind of assumed that he was going to be solidly in the first round. I'm not so sure that still holds anymore. He may slip out of the first round. He may still slide into the back end of the first round, but I could actually see him, if things break right on draft day, for some of the teams down at the bottom of the first round who are looking for specific players, I could see a potential for Peter Holland to drop actually out of the first round, even though he's been considered pretty steadily all season to be a solid first round pick. I think Nazem Kadri is another player who didn't really do all that well at the combine in terms of his personal interview process. I think there's some teams that are concerned about his off-ice and on-ice discipline, and how hard he works on off-ice training, that sort of thing. I think Nazem Kadri is a guy who's a terrifically skilled player, but kind of selfish with the puck. He doesn't really distribute the puck as well as he should, and I think there are some teams that are just a little bit leery. Again, it only takes one team, picking up relatively high, to make a guy a top 12 or 13 selection. But it could happen on draft day that a kid like Kadri, even though he's a top 15 talent for sure, might drop down a little bit lower than that into the 18-20 range. Somebody down in that 18, 20, 21 range, might get a really good value pick in a kid like Kadri who certainly has top 10, top 12 potential, but at various times has kind of stumbled a little bit this year. Nothing dramatic, but could just tumble down into the 18 to 21 range. The last player I'd like to mention just a little bit in that category of players who might have fallen a bit, and this is particularly, again, based on their interview process at the Scouting Combine in Toronto a couple of weeks ago, and that is Dylan Olsen. Olsen had actually been a pretty steady riser up the charts for most of the season, played very well out in Tier 2 in Camrose, performed well for Team Canada out in Fargo on the top defense pairing for the World Under-18 team in April. But he's had a difficult situation in terms of his home life, and his parents are going through a very difficult divorce. It's certainly impacted young Dylan Olsen. And there are some concerns about, what his mental state is right now in terms of, how he's viewing the game and whether or not the personal turmoil in his own family, might affect him in terms of his development over the course of the next year or two. And then there's a few players that I'd like to feature or highlight here as potential, surprise first-round picks, and there's always one or two of those where all of a sudden a name is called out in the first round on draft day, and the murmur goes through the gallery like, wow, who is that? Nobody expected that. I think there's a couple of players who fit into that category this year, and generally speaking, I think it's defensemen that we're looking at here. We're looking at, first of all, a big defenseman named Brian Dumoulin, a kid from Maine who's been playing for the New Hampshire Junior Monarchs in the Eastern Junior Hockey League this year. Big kid at 6'3", 195 pounds, very mobile, can handle a puck, and really has a howitzer of a shot from the blue line. So he can be the trigger man on the power play. And with that kind of size and skating combination, I think Brian Dumoulin is a kid that very quietly teams are, kind of, sneaking up their draft boards and hoping that, he might be there for them at the top of the second round, early second round. I think it's conceivable that a kid like Dumoulin, might go as high as, late in the first round. He could sneak into that back end. Also, Dmitry Orlov, the Russian defenseman, much smaller kid, only about 5'11", 180 pounds, but he's really good on the power play, moves the puck very well. Not so great in his own defensive zone, but I think, again, a lot of that is because the Russian under-18 team as a whole was not very disciplined and not very strong in their own end. But Dmitry Orlov, smaller defenseman, could be a really dynamic offensive type player. And along those same lines, Mac Bennett, a New England high school kid, was injured for most of the year. First of all, the New England prep school teams don't play, a very big schedule to begin with. They only play about 28 to 30 games maximum, and he missed a good portion of the season with a shoulder injury. Came back later on and played about a dozen games at the end of the season. Only about 6 foot, 185 pounds, maybe not even 6 foot, very average size, but he has very dynamic wheels, can really fly with the puck, and likes to really attack and force that play aggressively at the offensive end, likes to take the puck end to end and go with it as often as he can. Frequently it's at the expense of his own defensive zone coverage, his defensive zone awareness not that strong, but I think there's going to be a few teams out there that fall in love with that really good skating ability and the puck movement and the offensive capabilities. He's almost like a fourth forward or a rover out there. So I think Mac Bennett is another kid who could potentially, just possibly sneak into the end of the first round, more likely in the second round. But those three players, Brian Dumoulin, Dmitry Orlov, Mac Bennett, three very different defensemen in terms of their size and their abilities, but all could sneak into the first round. And then you'd have to talk about the gigantic, humongous 6'7" Finnish goaltender Mikko Koskinen as your last potential surprise high pick. I don't see Koskinen in the first round. We don't have him anywhere near the first two rounds at Redline Report. But I think because there's such a dearth of goaltending talent in this year's crop, and the trend is towards the big goaltender who covers a lot of net in the NHL these days. I think a kid who's 6'7", 190 pounds like Koskinen and has been a late bloomer over in Finland this year, he could surprise in terms of if a team is looking to reach for a goaltender and perhaps as high as the second round. Koskinen is a name that you could see coming off the board relatively early. So that's it for this preview of the draft, and we'll be back with you soon, probably right around draft day.